Fangames can be dangerous, especially for YouTubers. A few months ago, popular Let's Player Fusion Z Gamer had their accounts compromised by a Trojan hidden inside an indie game he downloaded off itch.io. Prior to Junior's launch, there were concerns that something nefarious might be hidden away in the game. The truth is, every time we download a fan game, we're taking a risk. We're running programs that strangers built, and there's nothing stopping a developer from embedding dangerous malware within their game. Thankfully, none of the major FNAF fan game releases have been suspected of housing a virus. That is, almost none of the major FNAF fan game releases. In the fall of 2020, Five Nights at Freddy's Running in the 80s was made available on Gamejolt. In this FNAF fan game, the player must survive 5 nights at FREDBEAR's family diner, defending themselves from an onslaught of animatronic foes. Between the game's slick presentation, excellent art, diverse gameplay, and solid jump scares, people were really excited about it. Community pillars like Dawko and Fusion made popular Let's Play videos praising it, and with good reason. It was a great game. However, a few weeks later, the game disappeared. Today, you won't find the original Gamejolt page for Running in the 80s. It's been purged from the website as if it never existed. Why would one of the most popular, high-quality FNAF fan games of the day suddenly just disappear? People were playing the game and they were enjoying it, right? What happened? Shortly after the game's release, players began to report that their computers were behaving strangely. People began to suspect that the game might contain a virus. The game's developers, There's No Stake and HackGame, were shocked. They made the game, and they knew they hadn't included any malware in it. Furthermore, neither they nor any of their beta testers had run into these issues. How could there possibly be malware in the final build? It didn't make any sense. Regardless, these reports were concerning. While it was implausible that their game had somehow been compromised without their knowledge, out of an abundance of caution, the team took the Gamejolt page down and advised players to delete Running in the 80s from their computers. FNAF Plus developer Fangame released a tweet reporting on the Trojan allegedly contained within the game and encouraging those who played it to scan their system for viruses. Then, legendary FNAF YouTuber Dawko replied, explaining that their computer had been infected by this game as well. With reputable community members corroborating the presence of the virus, people began to panic. Less than a day later, the news was everywhere. If you played Running in the 80s, it was safe to assume that your machine had been infected by dangerous malware. Thankfully, the game had been taken down, and thus FNAF was saved. Except it wasn't, because there was no virus. Running in the 80s never had a Trojan in it. No one's computers were infected by the game. The whole thing was bullshit. So how the heck did the entire FNAF community convince themselves that the game had a virus when it didn't? How did an unconfirmed rumor cause the developers to take their game down when they knew they hadn't included a virus in it? Most importantly, if Running in the 80s didn't contain any malware, why were reputable creators like Dawko suggesting that they had fallen victim to this Trojan? Something didn't add up. If you've downloaded a FNAF fan game before, then you're in my target demographic and should definitely subscribe to my channel right now. More importantly though, you've probably encountered the following Windows Defender alert warning you that this file could be dangerous. Seeing this alert doesn't mean the game you're running has a virus, it just means Windows doesn't know what it is. It's saying, hey, I've never seen this before and it could be a virus. Don't run it unless you trust the place you got it from. This is totally normal and it still happens with contemporary fan games like Junior's. Running in the 80s was different though. Rather than simply warning the user that the program could be dangerous, Windows would straight up delete the file automatically. You'd go to download it and your computer would just be like, no FNAF for you. This was immediately suspicious. Again, most fan games trigger a warning when you first launch them. They aren't deleted. Unnerved by this unusual behavior, a member of the developer's Discord community scanned their computer for viruses and found one malicious file, yawasin.aml. Nobody knew what this file was, including the game's developers, so they searched the name on Google and found the following. Yawamsin.aml is a serious computer infection detected as a Trojan horse. This nasty threat is a sneaky and filthy malware infection. It can easily intrude your Windows PC without permission and leads to major problems. Sounds pretty scary, right? First, Windows identified the game as a virus and tried to delete it. Then, subsequent virus scans started to pick up this weird file, and when people Googled it, they were taken to this horrifying website that says it's a filthy Trojan and it mines bitcoins and it steals your credit card number and it's gonna post your nudes to Twitter and it's gonna steal your girlfriend. Fangame included this description of the Trojan in his tweet, but people immediately noticed a problem. The sketchy file that Windows detected was called Yawasin, whereas this entry is for Yawamsin, a different file. Fiznom made a follow-up tweet acknowledging this, but claimed that both were reportedly dangerous files, which was true. Between the developers taking the game down and Fiznom tweeting these images, everyone began to believe that running in the 80s really was super dangerous. However, when Dawko replied to Fiznom's tweet saying that his computer had been infected with this same Trojan, it was over. The community started to panic. MatPat had played the game too. Could he be infected as well? If a virus somehow worked its way into running in the 80s without its developers' knowledge, could the same virus have shown up in other FNAF fan games? Heck, Scott Cawthon's official Five Nights at Freddy's is made in Click Team. Could that have been compromised as well? It was a scary thought. The first problem was with Windows Defender and other antivirus software. For some reason, this one fan game was showing up as a virus, yet other fan games like POPGOES or Candies weren't, which was quite suspicious. In reality, running in the 80s was one of the first FNAF fan games made using the new version of Click Team Fusion 2.5+. This update had only just come out, and Windows mistakenly believed that games produced using it were viruses. When people saw their computers complaining about the game, many ran virus scans to ensure that nothing had infected their systems. The problem is that most people don't run virus scans until something like this happens. Even if a virus was found, it wouldn't necessarily mean that it had come from running in the 80s. Everyone just assumed that it had. Furthermore, from what I can tell, the Uwasan file was actually harmless. It's a sketchy looking file, and there are plenty of people assuming that it's a virus, but I couldn't find any evidence that it actually was. Every official response I can find from Microsoft or one of their consultants suggests that this is almost certainly a false positive. This one response even outright says, "Do not trust any removal guides you might find related to Uwasan.aml. This is not the most deadliest virus ever." Most importantly, Dawko had played running in the 80s and released a YouTube video on it just a few weeks prior, so when he saw these warnings about it on Twitter, he ran a virus scan. Sure enough, Uwasan was detected, and Dawko very reasonably assumed that this fan game had given him the virus. In reality, Dawko's computer probably got that file from somewhere else. We've established that it was probably a false positive, and most of the reports I saw on it came from gamers, so it's likely that Dawko got it from some Steam game he downloaded. However, with the entire community freaking out and saying this exact Trojan Dawko found came from this exact game that Dawko had just played, of course he assumed that running in the 80s was responsible. This is called the illusory truth effect. If someone is exposed to false information enough times, they'll eventually start to believe it. Familiarity can overpower rationality. It began when Windows flagged the game as a severe risk. We know now that this was a false alarm, but most players' first experience with the game involved their computers suggesting it might be a virus. Scans were performed, and a couple of people found suspicious files on their computer. This was then reported to the community, who Googled it and found this article claiming it was the most deadly virus ever or something. At this point, the game's developers had seen so many things suggesting that their game might have had a virus, even they started to believe it could be true. They took down their game, but this had the unintended effect of making the virus allegations appear even more credible. If the developers themselves took down their really successful game that they worked so hard on, surely there must be something dangerous in there, right? Then, a reputable fan game developer makes a tweet further propagating these erroneous claims, and finally, the single most popular creator in the space replies confirming that they had fallen victim to the Trojan. With so many people suggesting that this game had a virus, everyone just believed it. Few stopped to examine the evidence. The mob had spoken, and it was now fact. Running in the 80s contained malware. Make no mistake, I'm not criticizing anyone. It's not like I was out there fighting to prove this fan game's innocence. However, if everyone had just spent a few minutes actually reading this description of the virus they were passing around, they would have realized it's utter nonsense. It explains how this Trojan is going to lead to major problems and totally downgrade your PC speed, but it never actually explains what it is, where it comes from, its mechanism of action, or anything. It almost reads like a generic copy-pasted description for any Trojan. I did some digging, and sure enough, I found the exact same language used to describe a completely different virus. It turns out this wasn't a real security website. It's an antivirus advertisement disguised to capitalize on naive people who see weird system processes and Google them. They use auto-generated pages based on common search terms to scare the hell out of you and convince you that whatever you Googled is super dangerous. Then they say that to fix it, you need to download their special antivirus software, which frankly could very well be the only actual malware involved in this story. It's a scam, and it fooled everyone. Regular community members, notable fan game developers, the Running in the 80s team themselves, and even Dawko. While it is a little amusing that we as a community looked at this copy-pasted thing written in broken English and said, oh, seems legit, it's also kind of sad. It just goes to show how easily misinformation can spread and how willing people are to blindly accept whatever they see on Twitter as being true. In the midst of all the panic, almost no one stopped to question whether this source was legitimate. Nobody even stopped to read the thing closely. Running in the 80s remained offline for the next few months whilst developer Hack tried to determine what had happened. During this period, other Fangame developers upgraded to the new version of ClickTeam, and they too started to see their games flagged as threats by antivirus software. Shortly after, Running in the 80s developer Hack made a final post explaining everything that they'd uncovered, that there had never been a virus and that nobody had provided adequate proof that the game negatively impacted their system. Hack went on to systematically disprove all of the theories for how malware could have accidentally ended up in their game, but it was too little too late. The game had been down for months and everyone in the community believed it to be dangerous. At face value, it is somewhat amusing that the FNAF fangame scene tricked themselves into believing a game had malware when it didn't, and yeah, at the end of the day, nobody actually got a virus from the game. Still, it really sucked for the game's developers. For a period of time, There's No Stake and Hack were led to believe that their little free fangame that they made for fun had caused real problems for people. Imagine believing that your game accidentally caused someone's computer to break or caused them to lose precious family photos or something. That would suck, and I understand why going through that could be traumatizing. Even after it became clear that the developers hadn't done any of this deliberately, it surely must have sucked to see the community you love perceive your project as a threat or dangerous. Between the virus controversy and some other things that happened behind the scenes, There's No Stake decided not to re-upload the game. I think the lesson here is that we shouldn't be so quick to jump to conclusions. When it came to Running in the 80s, nobody had bad intentions. Everyone just wanted to spread the word and help keep people safe. However, there were several moments where had someone just stopped and said, wait a minute, let's look at this a little more closely, the entire ordeal could have been avoided. Running in the 80s would still be up on Gamejolt today, countless FNAF fans would have avoided the stress of believing their computers were infected, and most importantly, There's No Stake and Hack wouldn't have gone through the shitty experience that they did. So the next time you see something outrageous or inflammatory, take a step back and reevaluate. We're wired to react defensively when confronted with something we perceive as a threat, and it can cause us to make poor decisions. Just because you read something on Twitter doesn't mean it's true, and if something is objectively true, it ought to be really easy to prove. Seek primary sources, and always try to examine the evidence for yourself rather than taking someone else's word for it. I want to thank There's No Stake and Hack for agreeing to speak with me for this video. Stake is currently working on the COG Forever Spinning, an enhanced remake of Running in the 80s, as well as Five Nights at Wario's They're Alive and Chica's Party World. Hack is working on some cool stuff as well, but they aren't quite ready to show it yet. Links are in the description. Please give both of them a follow on Gamejolt. After what they've been through, I'm sure it would mean a lot. While Running in the 80s is back online now and it's perfectly safe, There's No Stake wasn't the one who uploaded it, and they don't endorse the re-upload. Out of respect for the developer's wishes, I won't be linking it. If you really want to find it yourself. I did. Anyway, be careful downloading fangames. The truth is, any of them could contain a virus, and the only assurance we have is the developer's reputation. There are no guarantees. Thanks for watching. That scared the shit out of me. That was such a good clip. Oh my god, that's gonna be so good. That might be the opening of the video right there.